here for a ride in this session because uh, he's a very knowledgeable and he has a different perspective than most of us has it. So Ken, floor is yours.
Thanks for that intro, Vivek, and thanks everyone for joining the session. As mentioned, my name's Kent Weare. I'm a principal program manager at Microsoft. I lead a team of solution architects inside of the Power Platform Engineering Group, where we're focused on automation and predominantly in the areas of Power Automate RPA and also Power Virtual Agents. So today what we're going to talk about is largely related to Power Automate and then a little bit of PVA at the end as well. Feel free to ask questions along the way. I do have the chat open on another screen here, so I will definitely be keeping an eye open for that. I have some slides to start with, and then there's 3 demos that we'll get to, so certainly won't be death by PowerPoint today. Okay, so let's talk just a little bit about automation itself. And so when we think about automation, there are opportunities everywhere. And you can't go a day without seeing something in the news or something from a partner, an SI partner, or an analyst talking about the role of automation and how organizations are really trying to find efficiencies in order to scale and naturally become more productive. And certainly COVID has certainly changed a lot of things and really put this front and center for a lot of organizations. And so what I want to encourage you folks to do is to think a little bit differently than you may have in the past, especially when it comes to robotic process automation, but really think about how you can leverage the entire Power Platform in order to drive automation opportunities. Now, here's a stat from Gartner. This happened last year. And it says more than 25% of suitable tasks for automation will be automated by 2024. So this represents actually a huge opportunity. This is there's like 2 sides to this coin. The good is like, yeah, there's a lot of work that can be automated, but then the flip side is there's a lot of work that still is yet to be automated. And so for you and your organization that you represent, this represents a huge opportunity for you. And really what we want to equip you with is the right set of tools that allow you to go ahead and do so itself. Now, when we think about automation, I do feel like the opportunities are changing. And this is really in the context of robotic process automation, for those of you that are familiar with that. So when it comes to RPA, and we're going to see more of this throughout the demos, it's really about emulating or mimicking what an end user would do, and to be able to record that experience and then to be able to play it back and have the machine, quote unquote, execute that for you. Now, when we talk to a lot of customers that may have existing RPA investments or RPA platforms, they oftentimes see these connectors as something that's, completely foreign or unnecessary. And, the way that we're approaching this at Microsoft is we're thinking about this problem a little bit differently. Like, our platform is very much a hybrid type platform that allows us to go ahead and use connectors, but also use other tools in the Power Platform in order to go ahead and drive automation. So an example that even I've run into, within the last year is, and I'm sure you see this a lot as well, is you might have processes where people need to go and email a spreadsheet in at the end of the month. And then, there's going to be a bot that will go ahead and collect all of these spreadsheets, maybe put them into like a network file share, maybe do some level of data validation or calculations, and then go ahead and drive some sort of downstream automation. Maybe it's populating an ERP system or something like that. And it's one of those things where maybe in that case, the best solution isn't actually RPA. Maybe the best solution is actually just building an app. Like, why not build the Power App to basically collect the data, enforce any sort of data validation rules, and then use automation to drive that downstream, like inserting all of those records into, say, that ERP itself. So that's really, how we want to think about this. And that's what I would encourage you folks to think about as we're going through this specific content itself. And really this speaks to the right tool for the job. And where I'm going with this specific statement is, sometimes people, and I'm sure you've all seen this before, is like we get so busy, we know what we know, and always sort of trying to find new ways to approach it seems like it's time that you may not have. And so, like, I applaud all of you, the fact that you're here spending your Saturdays trying to upskill and learn new capabilities, new skills that you can apply. Kudos for you for doing that, but we're not quite there all of the time. And when we talk about the right tool for the job, this is why it's really important to understand, all of the Power Platform. You don't need to necessarily know or be experts in all of it, but it's good to understand the capabilities so that you can start to make like the right decisions and build the right architectures. For me, I've got working level knowledge of Power Apps. I'm by no means an expert in Power Apps, but I'm aware of what its strengths are and where it may not be the best place to use it. I spend most of my time on Power Automate, Power Virtual Agents, and Power BI I know enough to get myself in trouble. But what this slide really represents is that when you are exploring these automation tools, or even if you're a consultancy and you're actually talking to customers about opportunities, in my experience, this platform has really fed itself. And we've seen situations where a customer might be only interested in a chatbot, and then that leads or introduces RPA. I've got a customer that's in this boat right now. I've seen another customer where they were interested in chatbots and RPA, and that was it. But as we were actually going through the platform, actually it was really from a governance perspective, they were like, hey, wait a minute, you mean I can actually build an app on top of the same data set? I can then build a dashboard on top of that same data set as well. And now I can do all of these other new things that I hadn't even thought about. And so I think that's what's really important. And by having that exposure to like the working knowledge of these tools is really important, because for them it was that light bulb moment. And I would say whenever I work with customers, they always have it, because they might walk in with a preconceived notion of what they need, and then all of a sudden find out, wait a minute, there's actually so much more that is here. And so when we do think about the Power Platform, I'm sure you've seen this slide today, but it really does complement each other. And what we do have is this solid foundation that includes all of these connectors, 400 plus connectors that we have. We have a democratized AI service. So for example, if we want to parse a PDF document, we can go ahead and use AI Builder for that. And yes, I do need to update my slide. We have the Common Data Service, which was recently renamed to be called Microsoft Dataverse, and that provides a data platform for us. It also provides a rich set of role-based access controls, business rules, and then also a solution packaging mechanism that allows us to bundle up these assets and put them in a single zip file, essentially, and then be able to move them from one environment to another environment, which really helps with our application lifecycle management itself. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how we can go ahead and empower your organizations with the Power Platform itself. And I think the core the core message here is just this idea of democratization. Every company is looking to do more with less or more with the same. And how do you go ahead and scale? And certainly from my perspective, I've seen this in the past. Like I used to work in BizTalk, where it was very much a niche. And the problem with it, even though it was a good tool, there were some high barriers of entry to go ahead and to use it. And so because it wasn't very approachable, you couldn't actually scale an organization through integration or automation at that point in time. But things have changed so much over time where now you can lower that barrier of entry and give more people the opportunity to participate in these solutions by leveraging this low-code platform approach. And I think this is really the opportunity when you think about getting more people to the table. Now, I'm not a big fan of the term citizen developer because I think it can mean so many different things, but I always like to look at things like a spectrum, right? You're going to have low complexity at one part of the spectrum, and then you're going to have like high complexity at the other. And there's a role for everyone to play as part of that spectrum. Whether you're a pro developer, has a lot of technical skills and experience, there's going to be like areas or opportunities for you at that one end of the spectrum. You might be very new to the whole Power Platform, still learning, might not have like a development background, and that's okay, because there's going to be areas where you can participate in this platform as well in order to drive outcomes for your business. And so this is just a slide to represent. I know that in the past we've had some mixed messaging about who Power Automate is for, and it really is for everyone, right? Whether you're an IT admin looking to automate governance processes, onboarding processes, access management, a pro developer that might be writing skills for a chatbot or custom connectors that can be used by the organization, or citizen developers where you're trying to solve a business problem and you can do that through self-service. As opposed to having to, put in a request, go to your project management office, and then wait, longer than you want for your solution to be developed. And I think that's really the opportunity. So what I want to talk to you today about is this idea of an automation journey. And that automation journey can be addressed using tools inside of the Power Platform itself. And so what I'm suggesting, and I'm sure this is not far from your experience as well, is that there's always this opportunity to rationalize a process. So specifically when we think about automation, if you're going to automate a bad business process, all you're going to do is make a bigger mess faster. And so there is this need to rationalize the business process, identify and remove bottlenecks. But how can you do that in an efficient manner? I'm sure we've all been there where we go in, especially pre-COVID, we go into this meeting room and we essentially talk through the business process. And there's always some variations of the business process. Well, no, you're not supposed to do it like that. I do it like this. Or no, so-and-so does it like this. And you spend a lot of time documenting that process and getting everybody on the same page before you can go automate it. But what if there was a better way? And so what we're going to talk a little bit today about is a capability inside of Power Automate called Process Advisor. So if you've ever heard of process mining or task mining, this is essentially Microsoft's entry point into that discipline. And now, so this is part of Power Automate. It is in preview. It's in public preview. It reached public preview back in December at the same time that we GA'd Power Automate Desktop. But this is something that you can go ahead and use today to explore and to help rationalize these processes and then identify bottlenecks so that when you are going to start automating, you can actually do so on a known and solid business process itself. And so something that we're going to talk a fair bit about today is called Power Automate Desktop. And so this is Microsoft's entry point into RPA, or robotic process automation. And so this was something that Microsoft got involved late 2019. We introduced what was called UI flows, and we had our own recorder experience. Then this past spring, so May, June 2020 timeframe, we acquired an RPA company called Softomotive. And Softomotive made a tool called Win Automation, and they had thousands of clients. They were, well known within the RPA industry. And so they've since been acquired by Microsoft. Their team has joined our team. And what has happened since is the integration and the evolution of Win Automation into what's now known as Power Automate Desktop. And you're going to see this a little bit later on, how integrated this experience is. But that's going to be a tool that we can go ahead and automate. Then when we think about enhance, what if we could actually enhance either like a customer experience or an employee experience by layering on a chatbot on top of that overall automated process that we do have. And so I'm going to show you Power Virtual Agents at the end. So let's talk a little bit more about Process Advisor. So the whole goal of it is that we can go ahead and try to understand and improve our processes. Now, how do we go about doing that? We don't want to, everyone pulls out their Visio. We want to do something a little bit more deterministic. What we can go ahead and do is actually get business users to go ahead and record all of their steps that they would typically go ahead and provide as part of their business process. We can then get all of that data being brought together and run through an analysis stage, and then we can go ahead and generate analytics. And so what you're seeing here is a process map that represents the different paths that people are taking as part of completing a business process and the related time associated to that. So this gets you out of that, well, this is how I do it, this is how so-and-so does it, and you're doing a lot of guesswork. Here we can do use a recorder experience. Now, in terms of that recorder, this recorder actually is Power Automate Desktop, the same tool that we use to go ahead and record scripts that allow us to capture keystrokes and also mouse clicks, when we go ahead and automate our downstream processes itself. So this is typically what the process looks like. We create a process. You can kind of think of it like a project. You can then record your sessions, then invite your colleagues, then go ahead and annotate them. So there's going to be some metadata that we want to collect. So you can kind of think of it as taking a big process and then, breaking it down into smaller chunks, like a sub-process. And then what we can go ahead and do is analyze that. And that's where we can start to see the bottlenecks, because we've modeled our business process in a specific way itself. So what I'm going to do is, instead of showing these slides, I'm just going to jump right into the demo, because I feel like, just in the interest of time, it'll also be more meaningful. So let's go ahead and just jump into a demo itself. Okay, so where I'm in the Power Automate Maker portal. And then on the left-hand side here, we can see that we've got a process advisor. It is in preview, and we've got processes. And so you can kind of think of this as, your business process, or almost like a project itself. And so what we've got here is we've got a series of recordings that have been made by myself and then also from teammates itself. And what we can do is we can go ahead and add a new recording. So we can just go ahead and click on this button. We're going to have this selected for us, and it's going to open up the recorder. Now, in order for this to work, we do have to have Power Automate Desktop already installed on our machine. And so that's what's happening here. We're going to open up the Power Automate Desktop recorder. So that's now been opened. I'm just going to clear my screen, and we're going to open up Contoso invoicing app. So this is going to represent essentially a business process that we do want to capture. So what we'll go ahead, we'll start the recording, and then we'll just go about how we would typically go ahead and fulfill a specific use case. Now, I'm not going to go through the entire use case just in the interest of time, but what I'm going to do is give you a piece of that. So here, the first thing we need to do is click on invoices, and you can see when I move my mouse, we've got this basically red box that's following it. And so what that means is that the RPA recorder is able to discover those specific elements, and then it's going to respond to any sort of clicks or mouse clicks, or keystrokes rather. And then on the left-hand side, we can see that as I go ahead and perform an action, it gets updated as a result. So here we're going to go ahead and capture a new invoice for Weare, and then what we'll go ahead and do is click on the contact, and this will just be Kent@litweare.com, and then we can go ahead and record the amount. We'll just say it's $2,000, and then we're going to flip this to invoice, and then we'll go back up here and we will click on save. Now at that point, we've essentially completed that part of our business process. We'll now go ahead and click on finish, and we will complete that recording itself. So let's head back to Power Automate itself, and what we will see is a new recording has been added right here. Now, what we do need to do now is we do need to annotate it. We do need to provide some metadata for it. So we can go ahead and click on it. And this is how, okay, it's still recording. It should be done here right away. This is where we're going to go ahead and associate that metadata, right? So we've got all of the steps that took place. What we can do is we can go ahead and remove any sort of personal identifiable information if we want. So for here, we've got, the fact that this person's email address was included. It's not actually relevant for our process. So we could go ahead and just remove this and say email address. So those are opportunities that we can go ahead and take advantage of. I think we just got a timing issue here with the load. We'll also be able to capture the screenshot for that specific step as well. So if we click on one of these, we'll see exactly where we had clicked on the actual application itself. And so, that's another opportunity. If there was sensitive data, we could go ahead and close it. But I still need to go ahead and basically annotate my script. So what I can do is add an activity. So for example, we'll click here, and then we're going to go ahead and add activity. We can then go ahead and create a new activity. Since this is an existing application, I already have a bunch preloaded here. So this is going to be related to opening the invoice app, right? That's that sub-process. And then what we want to do is perhaps, let's say we're going to go click on here, and this is going to allow us to go ahead and to create a new invoice. And then what we're going to do is here's when we started to insert new information. So we're going to go ahead and say this is when we're going to fill the invoice. And then down here essentially is this is when we're going to go ahead and save that specific invoice. And so once we're done annotating it, we can go ahead and save and then just flip this switch to say ready to analyze. And then we can close and go back to our process. So we'll now see that we've got a new record and it is ready to analyze. And at this point, we could click the Analyze button. That will take a couple minutes, so we won't do that right now. But what will happen is analytics will be available to us after. Gone ahead and I have that opened already. And what this represents is that process map. So we always start at the same common spot. And then what has happened is that we find that everyone always opens the Contoso invoicing app, so that's great. But what we can see here is that some people receive invoices from email attachments. Some of them are getting them from a network file folder, and then they go ahead and create new invoices. They'll go ahead and fill the invoice, save the invoice. So what we do see is that we've got some variance here, and we can see by frequency which ones they are, and then we also have the the related time that each path takes. So this gives us some data that we can now rely upon in order to understand, like, well, what is the business process that we do want to actually go ahead and automate. Sorry, this was I think the session is timed out here. So what we can go ahead and see which is the one that is the most prevalent from that perspective, and see that that line, and that would give us a signal that we should go ahead and to automate that specific path itself. Okay, and I do see the licensing question. I will get to that as time permits. And then also I do see a gateway question. I will talk a little bit about gateways here as well. And so this does take a few minutes to load. So this is, it is still in preview, but I do expect that this to improve over time. This is a Power BI embedded experience that we do have, and so as a result, we are pulling in a lot of data and trying to load it in this session itself. So what I showed you before was essentially the process map. Then what we can start to see is essentially all of those sub-processes. How long did those take, and what was the person involved, and how long did it take for them, right? So we can now start to see, based upon who submitted their recording, what was their related time frame associated with it. And so we can see both the average and the median time from that perspective. So all in all, this should give you some insights in terms of, what are the variations of the business process, help you identify what is the best variation that you do want to standardize, and then allow you to go ahead and to automate that process. And so that's where we're going to start now talking about the Power Automate and Power Automate Desktop more specifically. So certainly when we think about Power Automate, we do have all of these connectors that are available to us. We do have, over 400. This is something that is constantly changing. We're having more and more first-party and third-party connectors being added to the ecosystem itself. And then also when there isn't a connector available for your system, you can go ahead and build a custom connector. And then we also have the on-premises data gateway that is required in order to go ahead and talk to on-premises solutions. And so we do use the gateway for all of our RPA use cases. So when we do have Power Automate Desktop installed, like I do here, I do have a gateway that is also installed that allows for the communication to take place between the cloud and the desktop itself. And so that is a required component at this point in time in order for us to be able to communicate from the cloud down to the ground, to your local desktop agent itself. And so I'll show you a little bit more when it comes to creating a connection inside of our cloud flow itself. So naturally, when we do have these connectors or a Microsoft service, naturally we're going to have strong support for Microsoft 365 workloads. So whether that's SharePoint, Excel, or even Microsoft Teams, we've got a lot of embedded support there. But we also recognize that not everything revolves around Office. So we do have a connector for Salesforce, naturally Dynamics 365 and Microsoft Dataverse. We've got a lot of support for connectivity there. And then also for folks that may be using SAP, we do have a connector that allows you to connect into SAP. And then on top of that, naturally, we've got a lot of support from a desktop automation perspective with Power Automate Desktop to go ahead and automate those SAP workloads. Now, on top of that, another opportunity, and we're going to see this in the demo, is we also have AI Builder. And AI Builder is a democratized service that gives you access to AI Builder or artificial intelligence scenarios or capabilities. So the ability to scan a business card is an out-of-box model that exists as part of the Power Platform or Power Automate. And then we also have other capabilities such as forms processing. And so we're going to see that today where we can actually send in that invoice that we were talking about with Process Advisor, scrape the relevant information from that invoice, and then use it to drive an approval, and then also drive automation downstream as well. And so that's what our Power AI Builder allows for. And with it being part of the platform itself, it really does create opportunities for us and make our automations more intelligent. Now, one thing that does come up a lot, especially with folks that may be familiar with other RPA platforms, is, so what's Microsoft's secret sauce, or what makes Microsoft special? And I think, this is how we look at it. We feel that our offering is unique from this capability where we have the ability to go ahead and automate and integrate with all of these modern systems that have APIs like Office, like Dynamics, like Salesforce, like ServiceNow, all of those types of applications. We don't want you recording screens, recording automation scripts where you have APIs and connectors. Connectors are going to be more performant, they're going to be more reliable, and they're going to allow you to scale. But we also realize that there is this long tail of automation, and there's going to be scenarios where the application doesn't have an API, or you may not have access to those APIs. And so we certainly see this with systems like SAP, where people aren't going to just, give you access to that API or let you build an API, but they are going to let you go ahead and automate through the front end, because that's what you would typically do as a user anyways of SAP. You're going to go in, enter transaction code, you're then going to go through various tabs and issue mouse clicks, button clicks, and so what we're going to be able to do is allow you to go ahead and automate it. But where I think the real opportunity is the ability to bridge both of those spectrums and take advantage of these connectors, especially around triggers, so that we can have data-driven automation and then drive those desktop automation scenarios itself. And so much like we saw in Process Advisor, we have that ability to record a task. We can do the same thing with Power Automate Desktop, where we can record a script. We can then essentially replace those hard-coded values with inputs and then be able to use them inside of Power Automate Cloudflow in order to pass those inputs and then be able to execute or play back that recording. And so when we talk about Power Automate Desktop, it is something that you do install on your machine, and it is something that needs to be installed on a target machine if you want to, say, move this to production. You go ahead and use an editor-like experience where you can drag and drop. It's very visual, and you can drag and drop these actions. And we're going to give you a series of pre-built actions that help you with recording, but we also provide you with other useful actions that you can use. Things like opening an Excel document, finding the first free row in that Excel document, going to be able to handle, say, opening and saving files, things like that that are almost like a connector. They surface as actions inside of Power Automate Desktop. And then naturally, we have the ability to surface any of these desktop automations through a connector inside of Power Automate so that we can go ahead and bridge the cloud with the desktop automation itself. Now, with our acquisition of Softomotive, they did bring some capabilities that did really enrich our offering. These are some of them: enhanced support for Java, Citrix, basically the ability to drive automation through Citrix, SAP, and then also legacy systems like an AS400 or mainframe. And we had very little capabilities before. On top of that, they also created, brought some additional browser support with them, and then unified both a web and a desktop recording experience. Previously, we were dependent upon Selenium for web-based automation. That's no longer the case. We can go ahead and just use a single tool for that. Now, as we see we're building out these scripts, we can naturally go ahead and add loops and conditions and pass inputs and outputs. So we do have a rich, like what I would call flow control, in the sense that we can model and impose logic that addresses our business requirements. And so here's just another look at our authoring experience. What is also pretty interesting about our platform is that we do have support for scripting tools. And so if you need to go ahead and orchestrate PowerShell, you can go ahead and do so. Same thing with Python would be another one. If there was like a specific, say, data wrangling job that you needed to run and you wanted to be able to orchestrate, now you can go ahead and do that. And so certainly seeing a lot of interest from a PowerShell perspective. The IT admin persona that has PowerShell, they're very comfortable with it, but what they do need is more support from like a scheduling and orchestration perspective, and that's something that we can go ahead and provide. On top of all of this, as you would expect, rich error handling capabilities, and what's really important, and this is another thing that separates us from a lot of our competitors, is that we're able to take all of this telemetry and send it back up to the cloud. And so this gives us a unified place where we can go ahead and see our cloud-based executions and also our desktop executions. And we give you like that follow the breadcrumb type experience where you can see, where exactly it failed, what were the inputs, what were the outputs, and so if you enjoy that experience inside of Power Automate Cloud Flows, you're going to be very comfortable in terms of how we address that from an RPA perspective. Now, here's what I was mentioning before about the ability to surface those desktop automation scripts through a connector. So we have essentially a Power Automate desktop connector where we can go ahead and call the run a flow built by Power Automate desktop, then be able to select it from a drop down and then choose our mode, whether we want this to be attended or unattended. And then what we can do is just hit save, and it will then inspect that desktop flow, understand what are all of the inputs required and what are all of the outputs that are going to be returned, so that we can easily map data in and out of the platform itself. And so what we do have here is we're going to now show you the demo of how we can go ahead and call Power Automate Desktop itself. Now, in the interest of time, I won't be able to build this from scratch, but I will show you an end-to-end scenario. So we do have that contractor that needs to submit an invoice, and they're going to send that in through an email and include the PDF. We're going to use AI Builder to extract those contents. We'll send them off to the project owner as an approval inside of Teams, and then we'll go ahead and drive that downstream automation itself. So let's flip over, and what we're going to do is head over to our email, and we're going to have an invoice here that we want to go ahead and submit so that we can actually go ahead and get paid. So we'll just forward this. And let's just take a quick look at this specific invoice where we can see what are the characteristics of it. We've got the invoice number, which is going to be important to us. We've also got the balance that is going to be important to us. Obviously, the bill to and the contact are also going to be interesting for us from an approval perspective, but then also when we need to go ahead and feed our Contoso invoicing application, we're going to automatically take the details from this document and be able to insert them into this application itself. So at this point in time, I've now received an approval, right? So this is the approval that just came in. I'm in Mountain Time here, and I can go ahead and approve that specific invoice. And then what's going to happen is that we're then going to go ahead and kick off the RPA process. And so this essentially is our workflow where we've received the email, we've been able to take that attachment off, we've been able to pass it into our predict action. This is our AI builder action, where we're able to scrape those related details that we were interested in. Then what we were able to do is we were able to go ahead and send off that invoice for approval through Microsoft Teams. And so that's what we had just done here. And because I had clicked on the approve, what had happened was that I was able to go ahead and call this specific desktop process, this desktop automation, and pass in those related values into that specific script. And so when we look at that script, this is the script that I do have here. I had used the desktop recorder to go ahead and record all of those actions inside of the Contoso app, like we saw with Process Advisor. And then what I was able to do is replace all of those hard-coded values with inputs. And so I went in here and I would add a new input. I can provide a default value when I'm going to go ahead and debug this locally. And that allows me to then replace the hard-coded data that was previously there when we recorded. And what we're able to do is we were able to now go ahead and pass then these inputs in from the cloud to make this dynamic. We go ahead and we essentially insert that invoice, and then we can close out that application. And then what we can do here is we can go ahead and send an email back to the requester, indicating that in this case their amount has been approved. Now, okay, at this point, let's take a couple of these questions just because I don't want to sort of go too far and leave these. So hi, is it possible to, for Process Advisor to have longer lead times in which not only I am involved? So this is some good feedback. There's some work being done in this area, knowing that sometimes there's like, tag your it or pass the ball and, have people go ahead and record, parts of it. At this point, there's no way to sort of stitch those together. So we are dependent upon a single person to go ahead and run through that end to end. But this is a popular requirement that we have had. So I would expect some changes in the future from that perspective. There was a question about gateways. Now, gateways, that's kind of a longer conversation. It's going to be hard to debug on this specific call, but you do need to have a gateway. And so when you go ahead and install the on-premise data gateway, you go ahead and install it. You log in with the same credentials that you're logged in here. Now, what has to happen is there are, back to that data residency conversation we had in the Q&A, there's basically a match. You can't have a gateway in a different environment. And so when you're installing that, there's going to be this drop down as part of the installer that allows you to choose your region. And you want to make sure that that region shows up here. That region matches the region in which you're building your flows, because otherwise you won't be able to go ahead and see that specific gateway. Because when I go ahead and create a new connection, it's going to ask for my gateway that I want, that I have access to. In this case, I'm using this one, Lydia US West 2. And when that is then installed, I can see it. And then I need to provide the credentials for the user that I'm going to log into that system with. And then I can go ahead and log. That's when this gets called. Those credentials essentially get passed in, log into the machine, execute the script, and then go ahead and log out. Okay, RPA capabilities have to be licensed separately, but Process Advisor is included in an Office 365 license plan. So that's the question. Not quite. So there has been no licensing details shared just yet around Process Advisor. I do expect that shortly. This spring, I do expect this to be GA. And so around that time, I would expect the licensing information to be provided. You are correct. RPA does require an additional license. There's some nuances there, but there's an attended license, which is licensed per user per month. And then there's also an unattended license for more of like your, your background processes that are also licensed per month as well. They're more machine-based license as opposed to user-based, but you are correct. There are some additional licenses required for RPA. Does RPA only run on Windows 32 systems? No. In fact, like I'm running, this is all 64-bit. Now, this is an older application that I was showing you. Operating system, it can be 64-bit. And then there's a question around, so instead of building a custom connector, can I also use RPA for SAP? Are all SAP products supported? So it's hard to say that one. We've got a lot of support that we've published, and I'll try to get a link for this before the end, but we do have an SAP playbook, an SAP automation playbook itself. One thing I will caution you is that when it comes to the web, and this isn't so much specific to SAP, but just a situation we ran into recently with another customer, is that the version of IE that your SAP instance support is something to be aware of. Our web recorders don't support anything older than IE9. So if you are running your SAP websites in compatibility mode, they need to be in at least IE9 from that perspective. So that's that part. But otherwise, yeah, we do have support for like the SAP GUI. There's a few different approaches we can take where we can use the recording. Also, SAP exposes some recording capabilities where you can extract that VB script and then use that scripting module that we talked about. So we've got like a more than 100-page doc on SAP capability. So probably better just to refer to that. And then there's a question around, do people who enter the invoice information need a license? There's some nuances here, but it kind of depends on how the automation was triggered. So in this particular example, we received an email, and the email had to be retrieved, and then we kicked off this process. Now, if this was the case, like we can't force everyone who sends an invoice a license. So those people could be outside of the organization, and this would be responding to what's called a data event. Now, in general, when you have data events, you don't need to have additional licenses for like all of the people that could be creating that data. But what I will say is when you have a scenario where an end user might be clicking a button to kick off an automation, that is where they would require a license. So there's quite a few nuances there, but in general, if you have data events, you don't need to have everyone licensed, but if you need to be authenticated, so I'm in my mobile app, I click a button, I'm in a SharePoint site, and I click a button and it's an authenticated session, or I'm in a Power App and I'm in an authenticated session and I click a button, that will require licenses from that perspective. So hopefully that does address some of those questions itself. Now I'm going to jump ahead here. Actually, I'll probably just get right into this slide, just in the interest of time. So I want to be respectful to the next presenter as well. So when we think about Power Virtual Agents, it is a conversational chatbot experience. It's part of the Power Platform. It integrates really well with the Power Platform. And the whole goal with this is we want to democratize chatbots. We want to lower that barrier of entry for people to go ahead and to build those conversational experiences. And so there's another dependency of PVA, and that's the bot framework. So the bot framework is a very rich framework. It's open source. It allows you to build these conversations, but generally through code. And then you need to go ahead and deploy them into Azure or another runtime. But it is very technical to get that working. And so with Power Virtual Agents, we want to democratize, we want to lower that barrier of entry, and we want to be able to have subject matter experts the ability to go ahead and build out these experiences as well. And so what we can do is use a drag and drop experience, kind of, you know, it feels like a workflow-ish type tool where we would go ahead and model a conversation. And as part of modeling that conversation, we can ask questions, we can get the results, we can then route based upon, you know, what the result is. We can ask further follow-up questions that are contextually aware in order to try to provide a self-service experience so that people can get value out of using a chatbot as opposed to always having to go ahead and talk to a human itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just expand upon what I had previously talked to you all folks about, right? Where we've gone ahead, we've automated our process, that's great. But what about if I am that contractor who has submitted my invoice? How do I, you know, how can I find out the status of that invoice? And the answer to that is really Power Virtual Agents. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick off another job just so that we can go ahead and see this in action. So let's go ahead and send this. I'm not going to approve this right away. Okay, so that's been sent. Now what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to head over to my chatbot. And so as part of the chatbot experience, we've got what are known as topics. You can kind of think of these as like conversations. And we have essentially system topics that represent common conversations or portions of a conversation that you would typically encounter. So a greeting. So I walk up to a bot and I say, hi. You know, we don't expect you to have to like reinvent that wheel every time. We provide that out of the box. Same thing with if, you know, if you're going to depart, you know, goodbye, we provide that out of the box for you as well. But we can go ahead and extend the greeting itself. So in this case, maybe what we want to do is this is going to be essentially like our partner-facing bot for our partners to request information about our service. And so what I can go ahead and do is I can go ahead and just, you know, start a conversation with this bot. I can just say hi. And what's going to happen is we're going to kick off this greeting. Now, as part of the greeting itself, there is this need to go ahead and collect an email so that we can go ahead and validate who they are. And so I'm going to essentially provide this email address, and this will, you know, we can go ahead and then call a flow that will go ahead and validate this information. So here I'm asking some questions. We're going to store those answers as variables, and then we can go ahead and kick off our extensibility. Now, we did go ahead and call a flow there to help validate that we are a valid partner, and that's how it was able to determine my name. Now, on top of that, I'm now reaching out to Bot Framework Composer, which is what I would call a low-code extensibility option as well, where I can go ahead and create more interactive cards like this thumbnail card here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the payment status option because I want to be able to look up the status of my invoice. And so now I'm being prompted for my invoice, and here's the invoice number. And so once again, we can pass this information off to Power Automate, where it'll go ahead and look up inside of Microsoft Dataverse what is the current status of our request. But as we know, we've got a process that deals with this. So Lydia has now gone ahead and had a chance to review the invoice and can go ahead and approve that invoice. And so if I go back to our virtual chatbot, I can go ahead and type in payment status again. And I'm going to get prompted for my invoice, so I can go ahead and provide that. And now we should be able to see that this, oh, okay, so it hasn't completed. The RPA job hasn't quite completed yet. As soon as this is done, we'll be able to run that command again. And then here, let's try this one more time. Oh, it's still not done yet. Okay, there we go. So what it was just a little bit of lag from the RPA process completing and returning context back up to the cloud so that we could update our audit. But as you can see, you get the point about how we can now sort of layer on additional experiences by using a chatbot itself. So I know I'm pretty much out of time here. So what I will leave you with is a call to action. Here's some relevant information that's worth checking out. So we do have RPA in a day, PV in a day, that's free training. Oftentimes you might be able to find partners providing that for free that you can join. Some YouTube videos, the team that I'm part of, we do publish content regularly, patterns and practices for both of these technologies on our YouTube channel. And then on top of that, I also have a YouTube channel where I'm generally posting weekly on Power Automate and Power Virtual Agents. So I would go ahead and check that out as well, please. Any additional questions that haven't been answered at this point?
Thanks a lot, Kent. There is one last question. That is licensing question. Could you please address that?
Okay, and this is the my understanding so far is if someone sent an email, then that person doesn't need a license. Yeah. So in general, that is true. So how this works is you go ahead, like this is the way I typically describe it. You as a developer, as a maker, you need a license to build these automations. So you would generally go ahead and buy what's called an attended per user plan. That allows you to go ahead and build unlimited attended bots. And an attended bot requires an active session that will on your machine. So what I was showing you before was attended. And so what it means is that it will connect onto my machine and it expects an active session is there that it can use. It will then go ahead, perform its work, and then basically, abandon that session. That's how you can go ahead and build all of these devs. There's some scenarios where you might want to do that in production. And if that's the case, you don't need an additional license, but it will take over your machine or it will be on your machine while you're doing other things. You can also then publish as an unattended bot. So this would be, I've built it in dev, I've tested it, now I want to move it to production, but I don't want to have to be logged in to use this. That's when you would go ahead and buy an unattended license, which would allow it to run on a remote machine and it would log in automatically, do its work and log out. Now, you can't just buy an unattended license on its own. You need to either tie it to an attended license. So in that scenario, it would still work. Or if you had that other scenario I was talking about where you had an authenticated user clicking a button that would call an RPA, that's when you would need what's called a per flow license. And that would entitle everyone in your organization to use your RPA bot. So that was kind of one of the subtleties that I was referring to from that perspective. Okay, so I think I am at time, but thanks everyone for joining my session. Feel free to reach out on Twitter or LinkedIn as well. You can find me on there. Just say that you were at my session here. And yeah, thanks for having me and enjoy.